Hi there. Thanks so much for joining me today for the latest episode of Impact Real Estate Investing. My guest today is Lance Chimka. Lance is the relatively new and extremely energetic Director of Allegheny County's Economic Development Department in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He has a very contemporary take on what government ought to be doing, and that includes investing in real estate to advance the economy. Lance is building a collaborative team environment, working with developers throughout the county, lending where banks dare not go, always with his eye on economic development, growth, and always with the thought of how our region can do better. Learn how Lance and his team are supporting development in a not quite market rate environment. Be sure to go to evepicker.com to find out more about Lance on the show notes page for this episode. And be sure to sign up for my newsletter so you can access information about impact real estate investing and get the latest news about the exciting projects on my crowdfunding platform, Small Change. Hi, Lance. I'm really excited for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Pleasure's all mine, Eve. Thank you. I'm honored that you would have me on.
We're going to have a great time.
Absolutely. We usually do.
In not a lot of time, you've gone from being an intern at Allegheny County Economic Development to the organization's director, and then you did a few odd jobs in between. And that's a pretty meteoric rise, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it has been pretty quick. It sometimes didn't feel that way, but I think that the cool thing about that is that whole progression is absolutely vital to some of the stuff I want to get done now. And I wouldn't have changed that course at all. Like understanding kind of the daily struggles of interns in my office absolutely directly informs how I work on efficiency measures here, for example. It's been incredible. And I've been really lucky to have incredible mentors along the way that have taught me a lot. I mean, that was one of my favorite things about public sector work is it touches so much that you're able to learn.
What led you to pursue a life in government service? Was it that first internship that you just liked so much?
When I was pursuing an undergrad degree in finance, it was kind of in the boom times of the 2000s, and I didn't want to take that route. Kind of always been a volunteer at heart, and so I joined the Peace Corps, and that was kind of the start of my real public service. And I just kind of knew. I came back to go to CMU and get a policy degree, and just kind of always knew in my heart of hearts I would always be in some kind of public servant role. Not necessarily in government work, but that's the path that I've chosen to this date, and it's been incredibly rewarding.
So that's what drives you, yeah. So for listeners who haven't connected the dots yet, Lance and I share a hometown, Pittsburgh. And a few decades ago, Pittsburgh was pretty well all but written off.
Mm-hmm.
You can listen to my podcast interview with Tom Murphy that I think just went live, and you'll get to hear the turnaround mayor talk about where we were then and what it took to shake that image. And that brings me to a statement that I read that you made, Lance, which was, we're in economic expansion, but we're not seeing some of the other growth that other benchmark cities are seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering what you meant by that.
Not to recap what you probably talked with Mayor Murphy about, but to get from the doldrums of 1983, which is really the trough of our local economy.
It was the bottom, right? Yeah.
Yeah, to where we're at now has been an amazing transformation, right? It's been all about diversification and it's of our regional economy. And then we have these 5 primary industry sectors in financial services, IT, energy, advanced manufacturing, and healthcare. And that's really, really important because in recessionary periods, that diversified economy is very robust and makes us the darling and outperform at benchmark cities in recessionary periods. However, the problem is that in expansionary economies, we lack the kind of exponential growth that some of our other cities experience. It's just kind of the nature of our economy currently is slow and steady, wins the race, which is fine. I think my goal is on the macroeconomic end is to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, keep the diversification, keep the slow, steady growth, but then really experience some of the upside and expansionary times, which we're in now. And I think the key to that is, and I'm really optimistic about the future of our economy, is across those 5 industry sectors, you have artificial intelligence, which we are an absolute worldwide hub of, cuts across all of those. And robotics cuts across 3 of those, in advanced manufacturing, healthcare, and energy. So those 8 intersection points that I think are the key to experiencing the upside growth. And that's some of the stuff I'm excited to work on.
How do you work on that? How do you improve that?
Great question. And especially like, how does government do that? The risk profiles associated with investments in startups are probably too risky of an investment for governments to be making. And not to mention, we don't have that skill set. But I think there are a lot of other ways we can invest in the city in a way to encourage that kind of growth. One of those ways is in real estate development, right? If you take something like biotech, right? A lot of times you've got companies that need wet lab space. You have extremely long periods to get through clinical trials. You have really expensive buildings that, because of the nature of the beast, you have, non-credit tenants. So I think when we're making investments in real estate, we need to incentivize those kind of assets in buildings that aren't going to happen in the open market. That's just one example. We lack high bay space for robotics. Some other specialty real estate that I think the public sector can play a role in mitigating the risk for developers who have non-credit tenants and making sure that building stock is available. Speculative development is another thing we've classically underperformed on. And in the kind of pace of the current economy, like, people are not waiting around 18 months to build a building. They want turnkey space ready to go. So we're working on a number of things to make sure that those types of building stock in speculative development is allowed for. And a lot of that is investment through tax abatements and direct investment and site assembly that I do here in this office. So that's just one example in the real estate. I think you can find other examples in public infrastructure, amenities, recreational space, and being really intentional about how we connect our tech hubs through infrastructure work, whether that's public transit or whether that's, really compelling multimodal streetscape design, things like that.
Quite a lot to think about, isn't there?
Yeah, it keeps them busy.
So you also served as an advisor on Pittsburgh's Amazon HQ2 proposal. And I'm wondering, in retrospect, how you feel about making it to the top 20 list, but not as an Amazon final city pick.
Yeah, I feel great about it because I think we extracted all the marketing benefit from it without any of the really, really, really painful stuff that might have been associated with it. I am proud of our approach to that. I think it was, hey, here's a suite of stuff that we, as every Pittsburgher, there's wide agreement that we need to invest in. And we don't have a revenue stream to do that. So let's take that suite of things we need to invest in and treat this gargantuan investment coming our way as the revenue stream. And I think it helped kind of distill that suite of that wish list, if you will, for us. And now, okay, we might not have the revenue stream, but at least it helped distill what we want to be as a city, forcing us to go through that process. And I think it was an overwhelming positive experience.
What's the top of the list that we should become?
I think the 2 things that kind of rose to the top, given the time in our city and the way things are trending, are people want a really robust public transit network. I think that was clear. People want and are concerned about rapidly appreciating real estate values in some of our residential markets. And that would be exacerbated by a huge investment like that. And so I think it really rallied people around public transit and around affordable housing, which I think is a positive thing,
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's great that affordable housing is suddenly cool again.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. People working in this field are like, wow, this is great. A sea change, in a really short period of time.
Yeah, that's true. Affordable housing is a really hot button issue now, isn't it? Everywhere.
Yeah, no doubt. It's great. And I think ultimately, we did not land that investment. I think predominantly it was a numbers game, right? a population numbers game. You're talking about
Yes.
a gigantic pool of workers, and being a small middle market city, it was tough for us to absorb that. And the facts of the matters are we have zero population growth in a 2 million metro area, and it went to a place with a 20 million metro area and 5% growth, and maybe a 12 million metro area and like 10% growth down in DC, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, it was all about
the numbers.
The numbers, demographics, bodies, population. And that put a fine point that we need to work on that as well, right? That's a huge Achilles heel for us, is a lack of population growth.
It isn't. I mean, that part of Pittsburgh's charm is its size.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about what should Pittsburgh become,
Mm-hmm.
I think you should also think about what it shouldn't become, right?
Sure.
It's a pretty beautiful and rather unique city, and each city has its own strengths. I don't know. For me, cities go beyond numbers, but perhaps not for Amazon. Right?
Yeah, well, exactly. I think despite what they would tell you, I think they had to take a very analytic approach to that.
Yes.
And it's something that like charm and culture and beauty were probably not heavily weighted on that algorithmic scale, right? So, but I agree with you.
Probably mobility and housing stock were right up there.
Mm-hmm. I imagine.
You've barely started, but what would you like to accomplish at ACED?
Oh boy, I mean, a lot. So our twofold mission is this. One is the work on the macroeconomic health of the city, which is really about building a diverse and growing regional economy that's opportunity rich for everyone to tap into, right? And we address some of that already.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of our mission is much more neighborhood based, and that's, we want to create healthy and vibrant communities. So all of our investments, and we make those investments in the areas of affordable housing and industrial and commercial development, infrastructure development, parks and rec, things of that nature. All of our investments are done with that twofold mission. So there's certainly a lot of things I think we can do and be more creative with the tools we have. I'm a big proponent of good government too, and I think there's a lot we can do to make the public sector meet the needs of our citizens in a more efficient and customer-friendly way. So that's the other kind of side of this that I work on, is not only mission delivery, but just government efficiency is a twisted hobby of mine that I like working on.
That's a really great hobby.
Yeah, I mean, hey, everyone needs a hobby.
Yeah.
And to be more specific, again, I talked about the real estate assets that I think we need to incentivize. A big concern of mine is, if you put communities, you can kind of classify them broadly in 3 buckets, and there are tons of communities that are thriving, and we need to support them. There are a number of communities that are revitalizing, that need special attention. There are a lot of communities, they need stabilization. We need triage. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is direct fallout from the 1983 exodus of people with any sort of social mobility leaving the city.
Yes, yep.
And we have certain areas that they have zero market. Land value is negative, right? And that presents a whole slew of economic and social problems that go along with that. And we really need to support those communities, at the same time kind of leaving the development breadcrumbs from areas of high opportunity to establish markets. And you kind of need to string those investments along. It's going to be a while until I can take the strength of the market that is the Strip District for now and pool it across the Allegheny Valley, right?
Yes.
And pool it down into the Mon Valley.
Yeah.
And in the process, establish beachheads in Etna. And I need to establish that beachhead in Etna before I can really get to Tarentum and New Kensington, right? Same thing goes for the Mon Valley. I really need to establish a strong beachhead in Wilkinsburg and Braddock until I can really talk about strength of market in places like Clairton. In the meantime, we need to make sure that we are treating those communities with the respect that they deserve and addressing the blight and disinvestment that they're struggling with, and doing that in a really smart and strategic way.
Well, it must be really tough making decisions, because you can't have endless resources, I'm sure. And then you have to decide where to direct those resources. And for people who don't know, who are listening, Pittsburgh was around 700,000 people strong and really lost more than half of its population in the 1980s. And it's now still hovering just over 300,000. Although family units are smaller now,
Yes.
it's still a lot of vacancy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, there's some opportunity there, to some extent, affordable housing price per square feet is a supply demand calculation, right?
Yes.
The problem is the areas that are close to job centers, well served by public transit, and have amenities like grocery stores, we're seeing rapid appreciation there. And obviously, because they're more desirable places to live. So we need to make investments to ensure that those are mixed income communities. And we also have the opportunity, though, that a lot of other cities don't, to make proactive preservation investments in areas that have naturally occurring affordable housing. And we're doing both of those things on the housing investment side.
Real estate development is a major component of your work.
Oh, yeah. I would say most of what we do has a real estate component to it. Now, one of the things we're trying to get more engaged in that we traditionally have not is the workforce development arena. I think one of the big transitions we talked about, like the change in public opinion around affordable housing, the innovation economy has forced site selection to go from a predominantly site and building centric approach to predominantly talent-based approach. And I think in the past in the economic development community have taken a very hands-off approach saying, hey, there are specialists in workforce development. We're going to let them do their thing and we'll build the stuff and invest in those tangible building products. I don't think that model works anymore. I think the workforce challenge in the future of work is such an acute need that we really need an all hands on deck approach. And the more resources everyone can leverage to that end, the better. I'm just finalizing my budgets for next year, and we're probably making close to $1 million in investments in workforce development, which doesn't have a land and building component to it. And I'm proud of that, and I think that's something we'll continue to invest more heavily in. And that's everything from workforce readiness of teens to adults with barriers to employment, getting re-educated and prepared for the workforce. We need to attack this from all angles.
I was going to ask, is there a rhyme or reason to the projects you become involved in? But I think I'm hearing that your organization, you really play the role as almost a pioneer investor early on, when perhaps it's a little bit uncomfortable for private money to be involved.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Our investments, I think, are predominantly, well, one, we take first mover investments in site assembly, right? For example, so one of my big hypotheses was that people say there's no real estate market in Braddock, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I challenge that. I think it's the fact that the available real estate is not the right kind of real estate. So, for example, we assembled 60 tax delinquent single family structures, demolished them, consolidated them into one 5-acre parcel, and worked with a very creative developer on a takedown period that worked for the finances of that kind of constrained market. And they built a 60,000 square foot high bay light industrial building. It's probably the first new industrial development in Braddock in, I couldn't even tell you how long. This is a place that suffered 90% of population loss.
Yes.
Those are the type of things. In that case, we were a first mover and then worked on a aggressive land conveyance strategy with the developer. And now the great thing is we have new tax base in Braddock, we have new job base in Braddock, and almost more importantly, I have a comp now. I have established that land has value in Braddock.
Oh, yes, that's very important.
And previously that didn't exist. So that's something we did in 2019. They're going to take occupancy in first quarter of 2020. And we're really proud of that kind of work. So sometimes our investments are in that realm. Other times we're physical investments, either through tax leverage finance or direct investment. And yes, we assume a much higher risk profile than our private sector partners.
And have you been able to convince some banks to come along on the ride with you?
Yeah, and I think as long as you understand their underwriting criteria and their approach, they're great partners. You just have to understand what their sweet spot is and work around it. We underwrite our investments in a very similar way that banks do on the risk end. The difference being, one, we're willing to assume more risk. And two, on the return end, we think much more broadly about returns. It's not just about debt coverage ratio. It's about tax-based expansion that isn't necessarily going to pay us, but is a return to the project because it's a mission-based return.
Right. So it's a return to the region, right, as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We love working with banks and traditional funders, and we have the ability to be more flexible to allow them to meet their underwriting goals and still participate in the project.
What sort of projects do you hope to see more of? I mean, if things go really well and your investments pay off in the way you want them to, what sort of projects are you hoping to see arise independently in the next 5 years, let's say?
Yeah, I think if we do a couple projects like that light industrial building in Braddock, then that's the goal, is that you would then establish a market, and I can then start making similar investments in Duquesne and McKeesport. And like I said, you just pull that market down to maybe less centrally located areas. So yeah, more spec buildings, more high bay light industrial for robotics industry, more wet lab for biotech and life sciences. Hopefully some of our development community starts to realize that you can stand in Lawrenceville in $40 square foot space and look across the river at $15 square foot space, and
yes,
start to recognize that arbitrage opportunity, because these communities, they're fantastic, unique, beautiful places. They are open to development. They are, they're wonderful places to do work. And they're right adjacent to the urban core. So, rethink your idea of proximity, and let's do some great projects in some of these communities that are maybe overlooked in a lot of cases.
And then most importantly, it's pretty fun to be at the leading edge, right?
I think so. Sometimes, that's when you don't have a comp and the bank starts to get real nervous. That's when
I know.
they don't find it as much fun as I do. But yeah, I mean, that's part of the fun, is there's additional challenge there, but it can be really, really rewarding when you pull something off.
I agree. I totally agree. Yeah. We've also talked about how to empower people in these communities to be part of the change, the rapid change that's occurring in cities like Pittsburgh. And I'm wondering why you think that's important.
One of the big challenges we face as a society is disproportionate allocation of not only income. If you look at wealth, right, it becomes even more staggeringly problematic. So we're not trying to establish markets for just for tax base, right? Hopefully the idea is then, by establishing market, you can assist in families building wealth, right? And we want people to be able to participate in the benefits of these hopefully catalytic investments we're making. How best to do that is a challenge. Obviously it's easy when you have home ownership, high levels of home ownership, because that's, your biggest asset that appreciates with change in real estate market.
Yeah.
If people have that asset and they want to cash out and participate in that upside return, well, great. That's building equity, that's building wealth. And hopefully that's life-changing for the family that chooses to do that. I think the problem, because when people are very culturally, emotionally, and kind of societally invested, but don't have that asset to participate in the appreciation, how do we plug those people in to our changing communities and make sure that they participate? And that's where, lots of novel ideas that I think we've been talking about micro lending and equity returns back to neighborhoods start to become really, really compelling for that kind of segment of society, and something that I really want to learn more about and try and institute some really progressive things on that front.
I've been talking to some people over the last year who also believe that making a space for those people, like a physical space, is really important. And they do that in different ways, like maybe a community space. Mm-hmm. Or there's a developer that I know who very purposefully will create retail space and then look for someone in the neighborhood to fill it and really help them build their business into that space. And that, I suppose, that's another very concrete way to involve community and make them feel like they belong, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And maybe that's a silver lining on the challenges to retail real estate now, is that mixed use buildings are kind of hoping that's a break even spot, right?
Yeah.
And so what you have is then a really affordable commercial property for people to move into, locally owned sole proprietorship businesses that provide a higher return back to the owner.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can continue that.
Yeah. And so, like, I have to ask, what's, your background? You mentioned a little bit about it, but what did you study? What got you to this place?
I grew up in Pittsburgh. I was the youngest of four.
You were the baby.
I was the baby, and I probably act like it too much. But my first education was growing up in incredibly hilarious and brilliant family. So my parents were really hardworking, great people. I went to a mix of public and Catholic schools when I was a kid. I studied finance in Washington, D.C. at the Catholic University of America. Went overseas and lived in Turkmenistan for 3 years, which was arguably the most educative of all of my educational experience. And I came back to CMU to get a policy degree with the intention of going back to do more international development work because I found it just fascinating. But really fell back in love with my hometown, recognized that there were parts of my city that were in as much need or possibly greater need than what we consider to be some of the most poverty-stricken places on earth, and that didn't sit great with me. Yeah, all of those different educational life experiences kind of like led me down this path. And people like I said, I have had great work mentors that have given me chances to work on stuff. I've just been incredibly lucky.
I have a feeling it's not just luck, but we can go with that.
I think it's mostly luck. But yeah, like I said, it goes back to my parents. I think I do work hard at it because I love it. It never quite feels like work,
Yes.
Some days it does.
Yes.
Most of the time it doesn't.
That's great. And do you think, on the whole, socially responsible real estate is necessary in today's development landscape? Outside of the work you do, like everyday developers, what do you think that should look like?
There's crappy real estate development and there's good real estate development, right?
Yes.
I think good real estate development is about placemaking, and placemaking is about integration into the community, not just, from a contextual design standpoint, but from a community needs standpoint. And I think enlightened developers get that. And enlightened developers know that incorporating that kind of philosophy in the development usually leads to higher returns too. So I think it can be done well and it can be done profitably, right?
Right.
It just requires a kind of a philosophy, a mindset, and the ability to listen to people a little bit more. But in the end of the day, you have a much better project to show for it.
Creating something that's responsible isn't really swallowing a bitter pill, right?
No, definitely not, especially when you have your friendly local government economic development person to help you along the way and hopefully chip in where necessary.
And are there any current trends in real estate that you think are interesting or most important to the future of our cities?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting, being the hub of technology that we are. I think the design considerations around places like parking garage, for example, I think are really interesting because the rate of technological change is forcing people to consider the fact that this structure could achieve obsolescence in 5-10 years,
Yes.
which what previously was considered a 50-year asset. So I find that inherently fascinating.
It is fascinating, isn't it? I just start thinking about, well, what could you do with a parking garage?
Yeah, right.
How many housing units could you put into those little slots?
Precisely. And are they going to be livable?
Yeah.
And how do you remediate the oil afterward?
That's right.
It's a really interesting thing. So you see people speccing in higher ceiling heights than they would have previously, flat floor plates, all these different design considerations that I find fascinating, and even more fascinating because we're on the bleeding edge of all of the autonomous vehicle technology that is going to lead to the obsolescence of those buildings. So, yeah, I mean, that's one that I find fascinating. What else?
I'm watching zoning changes across the country, across the world, and I'm pretty fascinated to see how quickly that's going to move along. When you have cities, basically outlawing single-family homes, that's quite a statement.
Yes, I think Pittsburgh in particular is being very progressive in some ways with, allowing for accessory dwelling units, which I know you're probably an advocate for. And,
yes.
And what they've done with the Riv district, for example, and ensuring access to the waterfront, I think is some really good things. However, in some city neighborhoods, and this gets even more acutely problematic when you move out to maybe smaller municipal governments that haven't updated their zoning and code in a while. The thing that I find problematic is if you ask the average 10 people on the street what the vision for new development in their community would look like, and then you show them what current zoning allows for, they would be horrified.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's true in most places.
It's a huge disconnect, and it's worrisome to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's really expensive updating a zoning code. I've been involved in that. It's a really big deal.
It is, and when you multiply that by 130 municipalities with wide varying levels of kind of capacity, it's really a daunting task.
Yeah. And one sign-off question then. Given all of the possibilities, what comes next for ACD and for you?
I'm very project focused, and I believe that markets are built one great project at a time, and I try not to let the enormity of the challenges, get me down, right? It's just one good project at a time. We're focused on that every day, and we're focused on being innovative and creative every day. And there are a ton of innovative and creative people in Pittsburgh that we need to partner with and work with to solve these problems. Like I said, it's all hands on deck.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed our conversation. I can't wait to see what you do next.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eve.
That was Lance Chimka. Lance is embracing his role as the head of an economic development department with energy. Our conversation reflects the way that Lance thinks. Broad and diverse ideas to get at very particular economic problems. Lance is focused on growth first and foremost, making sure that Pittsburgh's growth matches other cities. But at the same time, he wants to make sure that no one is left behind. So he thinks a lot about how to empower communities in the path of rapid change and how to change the disproportionate allocation of wealth. I'll be interested to see the impact that Lance's leadership will have. You can find out more about impact real estate investing and access the show notes for today's episode at my website, evepicker.com. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to find out more about how to make money in real estate while building better cities. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and thank you, Lance, for sharing your thoughts with me. We'll talk again soon, but for now, this is Eve Picker signing off to go make some change.